Good evening, everyone. We are so excited that you are here with us tonight for the world premiere of our greatest Voice of Freedom film yet. This is a story of three very special friends, a lion and two tigers, who overcame incredible adversities and survived impossible odds in their many years' journey to the sanctuary. It's a film over 5 years in the making, and we're excited to premiere it with you live here tonight. For those of you who've never experienced one of the Sanctuary's Voice of Freedom films, tonight's going to be a thrill. Over the last several years, we've been profiling animals who have escaped captivity and now walk free here at the world's largest carnivore sanctuary, telling the story in their own words. By giving a voice to the voiceless, we give you, the compassionate and loving community that supports the sanctuary, the opportunity to walk beside these extraordinary animals as they discover a freedom they'd never known. In fact, to get things started, I'd love to share one of my favorite Voice of Freedom films, the story of one of our most beloved guests here at the sanctuary, Jumanji.
I've had many loves in my life, but not one so powerful as my love for Becca. She truly is the light to my darkness, the melody to my song, the shine to my star. Each day I await her arrival with much anticipation, knowing that she will speak the sweet things to my ears so I desperately want to hear. She will feed me the delightful treats and nuzzle me through the cage. She has other duties, other animals she must take care of and here at this sanctuary, but I know in my heart of hearts that I am the one she loves the most. Ours is a most special relationship. She was the one who saved me from the darkest days of my life. She pulled not only my body from the icy clutches of death, but my soul as well. Many years ago, I was enslaved at a roadside zoo along a small country road in Ohio, trapped in a tiny cage, not fit for a dog. It was no place for a creature as magnificent as I, and yet the indignity and suffering I experienced in that pit was tremendous. Here I am, a creature from the hot, humid jungle, yet I was crouched in the freezing temperatures with no shelter or heat to protect me from the bitter cold of winter. Soon I had frostbite over much of my body, and I was covered with stinging, painful sores from laying in my own urine. It was unacceptable, disgusting, and absolutely filthy. And I wanted to die. But then, the sanctuary, they came and rescued me. I was unable to stand, weak, and honestly close to death. It was at that moment, when I was at my absolute lowest, that I met Becca. She lifted me in her arms and carried me out of that horrible place to safety. She and her team of veterinarians leapt into action. They began washing and disinfecting my open, bloody wounds and nursing me back to health. She fed me a special diet, held me, spoke to me, told me everything would be okay, that I would be all right. I'd never experienced anything like it before, like light washing over my soul. For the first time, I knew a love unlike anything I'd ever known. I gained strength over the next few months, and sometime later I took my first steps out into this wonderful habitat. There, I met other leopards for the first time, and they soon showed me how to climb to the top of the tall tower and cross the immense bridge over our pond. It's here, on this bridge, that I sit all afternoon in the sun, watching the gentle breezes whisk the grasses back and forth below me, and I wait for Becca to come to me. When I see her arrive, my heart, it leaps with joy. I lope down the ramp and chirp my special greeting, the one that I do just for her. That greeting says everything. All of the pain I had been through in the past, all of the struggle, all of the patience she'd given me, and the joy she brings to my life. And she tells me she loves me. And she tells me it will be all right. It'll be all right.
Don't you just love that? Jumanji continues to live a full life of peace and joy here at the sanctuary. As one of the leopards right off the walkway, it's so delightful to see him up on his bridge above the lush habitat as he waits for Becca to come visit him. These Voice of Freedom stories are a spectacular way to discover the work we do here at the sanctuary. For those of you that are new here, we'd like to welcome you. The sanctuary is the world's largest carnivore sanctuary by a long shot. We are home to over 700 rescued animals who've been released from horrible roadside zoos, private residences, and circuses from all over the world. The sanctuary is comprised of 3 facilities. This one here, just north of Denver, a smaller sanctuary in Texas, and then the Wild Animal Refuge in southern Colorado. The refuge, which was purchased 4 years ago, is immense, over 9,000 acres in size. To give you a sense of that scale, it's literally over 14 square miles, 10 times larger than New York Central Park. All of this is paid for by private donations from individual donors just like you. And it's truly remarkable how thousands of donors from across the world have come together for what would seem to be an impossible task: to create the vast freedom available for these animals down at the refuge. We are so proud of the work we've done together the last few years and are grateful for your continued support. But our work at the refuge isn't done.
Impossible. Unachievable. Unreachable. They said it couldn't be done. It was total insanity. Purchasing over 9,000 acres of freedom, land enough to forever create a home for those who've languished in captivity for so many years. A massive space of openness, of freedom, of nature finally balanced out, where things are put back to right. A place of healing, a place of restoration, where the echoes of trauma, of pain, of abuse slowly fade away through the gentle touch of wildness that surrounds them. This dream to create this tremendous refuge is simply impossible. And yet today, in only a few short years, we have paid for this, the world's largest wild animal refuge. You and thousands like you created these precious moments of freedom. And so with the land purchased, we turn our hand to the next task before us, a task that could seem equally impossible. Building the habitats that these beloved creatures will soon call home. Thousands and thousands of fence poles, hundreds of miles of wire fencing, locks, gates, and transition pens, literally miles upon miles of roads, power lines, support buildings, nutrition centers, housing for the caregivers, medical staff and personnel, water troughs, irrigation, dens, and caves. creating the space of refuge for the hundreds of animals awaiting their turn to step out for the first time into a world so foreign to them, yet so incredibly familiar. It's simply an enormous task. Each staple that's hammered, each nail that's driven, a literal extension of the love of an entire community of people who care enough to create these amazing homes. And so today, help us continue our work here. Turn the page to an entirely new chapter for these precious lives, transforming raw land into a home. Oh, it's a massive task. Some might even call it impossible. Yet we know this. You, the combined might of thousands of humans who care for another beyond themselves, who see themselves as the vital link between slavery, captivity, and pain, to the extraordinary freedom of this place, this enormous slice of heaven truly represents. You are that link in this unbroken chain of love. And because of you, the impossible is simply what we do.
Now that you know a bit more about what we are doing at the Wild Animal Refuge, it is my distinct honor to introduce you to one of the very first animals to experience the freedom there. Premiering for the very first time, the epic story of Budashay, Bailey, and Leo.
I remember laying there in the darkness. Something definitely wrong. But everybody at the compound was on edge, amped up, nervous. Peering out through our cage, I saw dimly flashing blue and red lights. I heard a car come to a quick stop on the gravel road. And for a few moments more, the hills were quiet, except for the swishing sound of the trees, just swaying in the wind. Suddenly, I heard Boomer roar, and the quiet was broken by the sharp crash of a gunshot piercing through the darkness, echoing through the craggy rocks. And then, just the wind. Just the wind. The path to that horrible night started out so many years earlier, over in Missouri, in an illegal tiger breeding facility in a rundown farm called Bearcat Hollow. Supposed to be some sort of sanctuary. Yeah, always making a big deal about how they were saving animals, but yeah, it was nothing more than just a lie. See, there's always a whole bunch of baby lion and tiger cubs whenever anyone had come and visit. Pretty fishy, since it was against the law to breed exotic tigers. But there was always a dozen or so little ones ready to be played with or pet. As cubs got older, they'd get sold off to some horrible roadside zoo or as a personal pet to some eccentric animal collector, trapped in a tiny cage. Of course, they were the ones who had the good fortune to get out of there. The rest, well, they went to the shed. We didn't know what happened in the shed, but we knew it was a place to be feared. Deep down in your spine, and you knew that place was plumb evil. Even the little ones knew to fear that terrifying place. An older animal would be chained, hauled, snarling through the door of the shed. They'd disappear forever. Every few days, a truck would back up and large bundles would be loaded out, driven away. See, the folks that ran the farm weren't just illegally breeding and selling exotic animals, but they were making a ton of extra dough selling our skins and teeth on the black market. A few of us, I guess you'd call us lucky, were kept as display animals, something that the public could see and fall in love with to help raise donations. You know, help the cause. So at a real young age, I got put in another cage with another tiger, Bailey, and a lion named Leo. Leo'd been castrated as a baby. Never grew a mane, but it didn't really bother him. See, not much at all bothered Leo. He's Leo. Cross-eyed, kind of goofy in the head, like he never stopped being a lion cub. Leo was a huge draw for donations since he looked a little goofy. The owners called him Huggy the Lion. They'd put up signs saying, "We need your donations or else we won't be able to keep Huggy the Lion alive." Sick manipulative stuff like that. And it worked. Money came pouring in from the good-hearted people who really loved him. And that love for his goofy grin, yeah, all that cold hard cash he brought in, I think is why I'm still alive today. Well, after a while, the feds started noticing all the goings-on there at the Bearcat Hollow farm, and pretty soon stepped in and shut the whole place down, threw the folks that was running it in jail, and found homes for the 70 lions and tigers that had survived the chaos. Well, that's when things went from bad to weird. Like, really weird. Spirit of the Hills over in South Dakota wanted to take the whole lot of us. Said they'd give us a great home, treat us good. The thing was, Spirit of the Hills was tiny. They'd never handled that volume of animals, and in fact, they had only housed a couple of lions previously. Well, somehow the government agreed, and soon 75 of us were shipped over to South Dakota. Or at least the ones who made it. Quite a few of the female lions and tigers had been overbred, and several died on the trip, or had to be euthanized immediately when they arrived, and only 2 of them survived longer than a year. You know, at first glance, Spirit of the Hills was kind of pretty. Nestled up in the South Dakota hills, it was a rocky, craggy piece of land surrounded by tall pines, cliff faces. Problem was, there wasn't much space for cages. So again, we got crammed in these tiny pens. Pacing on hard-packed earth, surrounded by beautiful scenery, but unable to really move around much to enjoy it. At first, things were way better than over in Missouri. Every day or so, the owner of the facility would come up and visit. He'd pet us through the cage, talk to us, tell us he loved us. It was pretty sweet to be appreciated. Even though we were cramped, at least we were loved. Soon, lots of folks in the area started volunteering, and they really loved us. But after a while, things, they started to change. See, the owner, he was a bit of an eccentric fellow. Instantly likable, incredibly easy to trust, but after a short bit, his mood would swing, and he'd be filled with rage. Like, bright and lively to sullen and dark and back again in a moment's notice. He was a hoarder, especially with animals. He was on a mission to collect as many as he possibly could, which is why he tried to pack all of us in this cramped compound. It just wasn't big enough. Well, he loved animals, if you call it love. More like an obsession. He'd get some new pet and make him feel totally great. But then, all of a sudden, he'd switched his affections to the next animal or passion and he'd totally forget them, and they'd be left in the dust. Well, I remember the first summer watching as he bought a whole flock of specially bred show chickens. He spent days fixing up a magnificent chicken coop. He'd spend hours with them, talking about them, taking pictures of them, showing them to guests. But by the end of the summer, he stopped feeding them. every single chicken starved to death. As for us, well, it wasn't too long till we noticed that he came by less and less. When he did visits, he was less excited to see us, frustrated, overwhelmed by having to care for us. He'd be grumpy, furious, and even pretty violent some days. I think he was just burnt out. The food trickled and slowed too. Where we'd get a side of beef regularly when we first got there, soon all we'd get was a couple of raw chicken breasts from the supermarket. All of us tigers were struggling to survive. Even the owner's favorite tiger, old Boomer. Pretty soon, the owner became more and more reclusive, disappearing down into his tiny cabin for days or weeks, leaving the volunteers to handle everything. Well, one day, he just snapped, completely paranoid. He changed all the locks and kicked most of the volunteers off the property. So it was us and him. No food, no care. Sick thing is, you'd think he'd have stopped rescuing animals at some point since he was so unhappy, but he just kept adding more, loving on each newcomer like they were the only ones that mattered. There we were, starving to death, watching him dote on some new animal, giving them all the attention, all the food. Some of us got so weak, we couldn't stand. One day, the owner left town for a bit. While he was gone, a few of the kind-hearted volunteers from town snuck back in to check on us. What they saw was staggering. Here was a few overweight animals surrounded by dozens of starving, dying animals. The volunteers immediately contacted the authorities. When word got out, veterinarians and inspectors rushed in to check things out. Several tigers in really bad shape were immediately euthanized. They were suffering so much. The government processed the paperwork to shut down the facility. When the owner arrived, he started playing ball and pretended to work with the government. He agreed that all of us animals could be seized on October 4th. Shutting down Spirit of the Hills for good. That night, before the facility was to be closed, I remember him coming up from his cabin in the darkness, talking with us, saying goodbye, I suppose. He was real upset, really emotional, acting even more erratic and crazy than usual. After a while, he made his way down to old Boomer's cage. Sobbing in the darkness, we heard Boomer's cage creak as the door swung open. Well, I don't know if he was trying to let Boomer go free, or if he was so upset he decided to end it all. But Boomer, already plumb scared to death, did what any of us would do. He attacked the owner and tore into him pretty good. The owner screamed in pain as Boomer bit into his shoulder, blood spilling out onto the dirt. After the initial flurry, Boomer fled into the darkness as the owner lay bleeding on the ground. Soon, we heard him yelling into his phone asking for help. After a short while, the sheriff arrived, searching the darkness with a flashlight. Moments later, Boomer, he was dead. Shot to death because of some fool's selfishness. The next morning, it was absolute chaos. What was supposed to be a simple closure and rescue transformed into some federal crime scene. Armed officers everywhere. I remember the Wild Animal Sanctuary arriving in their big trucks, unloading cages, sweating in the humidity and heat as they worked around to each animal's cage. The sanctuary spent all day enticing us into the transport cages with fresh food. They didn't rush us, took their time earning our trust, creating a bond with us. I didn't trust them right away, but I thought, wherever we go, certainly can't be any worse than where we'd been. And so, we came to the sanctuary, just outside Denver. Bailey, Leo, and I got this huge habitat all to ourselves, bigger than the entire Spirit of the Hills facility, yet just for the three of us. I remember That moment, stepping out, feeling the grass under my feet for the first time, I felt instantly at home in a place I'd never known before. Soon I just started running. We spent a couple of years at the sanctuary in our giant habitat, just being wild animals. Bailey and I were always messing around, wrestling, rolling in the snow. Leo, he just wandered around being his goofy self, enjoying his life. We didn't know it, but our amazing new life was about to change and get even better. After a few years at the sanctuary, the three of us were given the honor of being some of the very first animals to experience the brand new refuge down south. I thought the sanctuary was heaven on earth, but the refuge, well, that was something else. Massive. Rocks, trees, caves. Truly as wild as it could be. You know, there's something that fills the soul up with a deepness, a stillness that you just can't describe as you watch the sunrise over the massive cliff faces that surround our home. A rightness, a justice, harmony and balance. You know, when we arrived at the sanctuary, we were so hungry, starving, in tremendous need for food, but starving for more than that. We ached for love, real love, the kind that's not temporary, not selfish, not looking for some way to use us for someone else's profit or benefit. Hungry for compassion that sustains, that grows. And here at the sanctuary, we found that love, more than we ever could have anticipated. And so here at the refuge, surrounded by such lasting love, we are truly filled up, whole, complete, truly free. We've been here a couple of years now, and now it's just Bailey and me. Our dear old friend, Leo, goofy old Huggy the Lion. He left this earth peacefully a while back, surrounded by the wilderness and freedom and love. It makes my heart glad to know that the last few years of Leo's life were filled with joy and wonder here at this magical place. Here, he was loved beyond measure by thousands of people who cared for him even if they never knew him. Cared enough to create a slice of heaven on earth while he was still here. And so, each morning, I sit out basking in the rays of the rising sun, surrounded by majesty and beauty, and I feel Leo's goofy old grin beaming down on me. And I'm filled up, content, whole, loved.
Thank you, Buddha. Your story is simply inspiring. It demonstrates how dark and sick humanity can be at its worst, yet also shows the tremendous love we all can bring as well when we tap into the best of ourselves. Truly beautiful. As we look out at the world, it sometimes seems like we are surrounded by chaos, turmoil, crisis, uncertainty, and pain. So many things impact us, our time, our sense of safety and security. Yet, inside of that is also promise. The promise of who we, all of humanity, can be when we set our minds to accomplishing something great by rising above ourselves, giving of ourselves, the gift that truly sets us free. I often think of the words of Fred Rogers, good old Mr. Rogers, who said in times of uncertainty, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. As I think of each of you who are joining us tonight, I am inspired. I know that we truly are surrounded by a community of people who love greater than themselves, who are the true helpers, who believe they can make a difference and thus are committed to do so, transforming the world around them, making each day a little brighter. It takes a very special kind of person to love another creature enough to see themselves as an integral and vital part of their journey, who would take on saving these animals' lives, restoring their bodies, healing their hearts, creating true freedom. And so, on behalf of Jumanji, Budashay, Bailey, dear Leo, and the hundreds of other animals we've rescued over the years, as well as the thousands of other animals still suffering in captivity today, I'd like to thank you for your continued support for the Wild Animal Sanctuary. Your gift in this moment and in the days to come provide exceptional peace and joy to those who've only known suffering and pain. Your gifts create life for these beautiful and extraordinary creatures. Transform raw land into these extraordinary homes, these massive habitats. There is so much love here, so much compassion, so much care, hope, health, and healing. And it all comes down to you. Thank you for who you are for them.